Some of the Stellar Technology soldiers looked at Charles's black shadow in the distance. Their legs were weak, and they were so terrified that they couldn't even hold their guns steadily. "How can we possibly win against that monster?" one soldier cried. A dozen or so level 4 paranormals had all attacked Charles at the same time, but he had killed each of them with a single strike of his sword. The power of the black sword was so great that Charles hadn't needed to use it a second time. Such terrifying power had left an indelible shadow of fear in their hearts. They had no doubt that, no matter where he went, he would only bring death. As they were watching Charles, an officer shouted, "Do you all want to die? Quickly use your swords. Even if they're a paranormal, the energy in their body is limited. All of you, attack now!" A paranormal slashed a deserter with a sword, and then he shouted, "As long as you can finish exhausting that monster's energy, each of you will have a chance to become a paranormal." A promise like that excited all of them. But their excitement was short-lived when they realized that even a high and mighty level 4 paranormal wouldn't stand a chance against such a monster. But when they saw Charles walking toward them, many of them still fired regardless, shouting, "Don't come any closer!" Countless guns fired at the same time, their bullet trails shining so brightly across the night sky, it almost looked like daylight. Then something unexpected happened. The invincible black figure retreated. At first, the soldiers thought they were seeing things, but when someone clearly saw the figure continuously dodging bullets and retreating into the distance, they were overcome with excitement. "He doesn't have any energy left," said the soldier. "This is a great opportunity for us. Kill him," said another. When they saw the figure running away, the tension in their muscles relaxed so quickly that they felt almost drunk. Whether inspired by the glory of killing such a monstrously powerful paranormal, or by the reward promised by their superiors, they were all overjoyed. Of course, there was also the effect of Charles's bewitching amulet, which could make people lose their minds. It made them overexcited, and it was very hard to detect. But it did have certain limitations. Its power could only be successfully used when the enemy's mental defenses were weak, or when they were already stressed. As a result of the amulet's power, the soldiers shot at Charles and killed many of their comrades with friendly fire. But they didn't care about that. They only knew one thing, and that was that they wanted to win. They wanted to kill that monster. Some of the paranormals wanted a chance to go looting, but they were stopped by their comrades. One of the paranormals shook his head. "It's still too dangerous. When they finally kill that monster, we'll take the credit." His companions stopped in their tracks. Charles retreated, thinking, "If I can outrun them, the paranormals behind me will easily lose track of where I am." And he quickly arrived at the location of the ambush. When the commander saw his team of soldiers following Charles, he and the other military experts were all astonished. "They're so brainless," he thought. Could it be that they haven't even considered the possibility of an ambush? A military platoon leader asked the commander for instructions. "Sir, are we going to fire?" The commander shook his head. "Wait for my command. He needs to be closer before we shoot." Soon, Charles broke into the residential building. All the soldiers opened fire at the same time, the hail of bullets ringing out loudly and killing a lot of people. "Useless idiots," thought Charles. "There's over 500 of the enemy, but they're so badly organized. Grouped together as they are, their front rows will be injured if their comrades further back open fire." The Stellar Technology soldiers were hiding behind a window in the residential building. They had positioned themselves so that their firepower could sweep across a wide area, even if the visibility was poor. The sudden burst of firepower had thrown them into a panic, and the little bit of courage that they had gathered with great difficulty swiftly dissipated. "There's an ambush!" one soldier cried. "It's a trap! Run!" another shouted. The soldiers who had managed to calm down quickly turned around and ran, but they had already entered the firing zone. How could they escape? The commander looked at how poorly organized they were and was puzzled. "Are they that weak?" he said to one of the other higher-ups. "Are their thought processes and tactical abilities so feeble that they just run around blindly? How stupid not to have considered the possibility of an ambush!" He was right. The Stellar Technology Army wasn't an experienced fighting force, and hadn't stopped to think that they might be ambushed. In their eyes, they couldn't possibly lose this battle. They felt themselves to be invincible, and the Dawn Alliance to be a bunch of useless amateurs. They had no idea how to plan and execute a battle, and now their weaknesses were being exposed. The commander suddenly saw Charles dashing through the crossfire. "What are you doing?" he shouted anxiously. "We still have a lot of soldiers left. Do you have a death wish?" Then he saw a water dragon materialize from Charles's body. The water dragon flew toward the enemy formation. Dozens of soldiers who were hiding fell to the ground, and then one 5-colored formation after another lit up beneath them, sucking the life out of them. Charles fought the rest of the enemy without stopping for a breath, using one powerful technique after another. Some of the weaker paranormals were killed by the machine guns, but the remaining people were at least level 3, and so could withstand the bullets. Charles took out his long black sword again. This sword was called the Sword of Death, but it wasn't a sword as the enemy fighters might have known a sword to be. It didn't have a physical form, and so it couldn't be damaged in a fight. Because Charles had long since understood the profound meaning of death, it was now a level 4 paranormal. He had been able to use his special powers and create this energy weapon. This was a sword of slaughter, the sword of death that could kill and leave behind no trace of life. "He's so fast!" shouted one of the military officers. When Charles rushed toward them, all the military experts turned pale with fright and fled in the opposite direction. Charles looked like a god of slaughter as he felled one paranormal after the other, and this terrified some of the soldiers so badly that they couldn't even move. "Wind barrier!" shouted Charles, holding an extract amulet that he had prepared long ago, and blocking the 20 or so paranormals who were about to run away with a powerful gust. Then he rushed into the enemy formation. Using the speed amulet, Charles ran so fast that he became a blur to the onlookers. With terrifying speed, he struck down a paranormal before he could react. "Hurry up and fight back!" ordered an army officer. Most of the medicinal paranormals were level 4. Now that they saw it was too late to escape, they could only fight back bravely. But facing Charles's massive black energy sword, they stood no chance and were too weak to resist. "Thunderstrike!" one desperately cried. "Force-chopping Splendor Mountain!" another shouted. "Crush Chop!" a third whimpered as he fell to Charles's onslaught. With his sword flying around him, Charles killed his enemies easily while dodging their blades flashing at him. A spiral flame started to spread, centering itself around Charles, surrounding him and 2 of the paranormals. One of them cursed. "Do you want me to die with you?" as he glared at the fierce fire-powered paranormal next to him. "We have no choice," the fire paranormal replied. "If we can't kill him, we'll all die here in the exploding flame." As he spoke, the area surrounded by spiraling flames exploded violently. "Is it over? Are we safe now?" asked a paranormal, waving his hand to try to blow away the smoke and dust. At that moment, a black figure suddenly brushed past him, slashing him with a sword and knocking him to the ground. Water Dragon descends. Another long dragon made of water appeared beside Charles. It attacked the enemy paranormals one by one, slowing their progress and giving Charles the opportunity to attack with his longsword again, killing 3 more of the enemy. In the face of Charles's huge sword and terrifying strength, even a powerful level 4 paranormal was extremely weak. The faces of the remaining paranormals grimaced in horror as they watched the carnage and whimpered to each other. "Monster! He's a monster!" "Impossible. I've seen many paranormals before, but none like this." "Run! We're no match for him! We can't possibly win this fight!" When Charles killed 3 more of their comrades, they became even more frightened. They were all paranormals who had awakened early in their lives, and they weren't ready to die at such a young age. Their high and mighty positions were built on their paranormal status, but facing death, their mental strength was no better than ordinary people's. So a few of the paranormals desperately attacked the wind barrier, wanting to break away from its power that was trapping them. Under the joint attack of a few paranormals, and the sacrifice of 3 of them as cover, the enchanted wind barrier finally couldn't hold, and it broke. "The barrier's broken! Quick, we can get out now!" shouted a soldier. With the wind barrier weakened, wild joy overtook their fear, and they thought they were finally able to escape. They were so excited that tears welled up in their eyes. Without even looking around them, they ran forward. "Fissure!" Charles shouted, harnessing the power of the Earth Amulet and creating a huge crack in their escape route. 2 paranormals who didn't have time to react fell straight into the chasm. "Help!" they screamed, as they tried to hold on to the edge of the gash in the ground. The remaining paranormals saw what had happened, jumped over the crack, and continued fleeing. "You'll all die a horrible death!" cursed the two paranormals who had fallen into the crack, despairing for their lives. Then the earth began to close up and bury them underground. As one paranormal after another died at Charles's hands, only a few remained because he had specifically picked the level 4s to kill. "Purging flame," he shouted as he held the purging flame amulet. "Cowards," he thought. "They won't even fight me face to face. Look at them running away without a backward glance." An explosive fireball with a flaming tail flew toward one of the bio-altered paranormals with a whistling sound and ignited his whole body. The paranormal that Charles had aimed at let out one shrill scream and then could scream no longer, lying dead on the ground. The rest of the paranormals were utterly terrified. One of them thought, "How many superpowers does this man have? Why is he so powerful when we're not? The world is so unfair." "Earthwall," shouted Charles. He hadn't had many high-grade extract amulets before the battle, and he needed to keep some of their low-level counterparts in reserve as a means to preserve his own life. So he targeted the last 3 level 4 paranormals as they were his biggest remaining threat. A stone wall suddenly appeared in front of them, completely blocking their escape route. The 3 of them flung all their energy at the stone wall, but barely made a mark on it. Despairing, they realized that worse was to come as the black figure of Charles, looking like the Grim Reaper himself, approached them. Their miserable screams rent the air as he finished them off. He pulled out his communicator to send a message to Olivia, shouting, "Full counterattack." Quickly putting his communicator back in his pocket, he turned to look behind him and saw the Dawn Alliance soldiers, who were lying in ambush in the residential building, all looking at him like he was some sort of alien. One of them thought, "Is he really human? Can anyone kill so many people single-handedly in such a short time? He must have killed at least 20 in one fell swoop." Charles's strength had shocked them to the core, making them wonder if they would ever be able to survive in this new era. Things were so different from what they had always known. Charles called out as he continued to chase after the remaining targets. "What are you still standing there for? Hurry up and kill the enemy." The Stellar Technology soldiers were all shouting at once. "They're all dead! He killed every last one of them! Don't make me face that monster again!" Out of the 4 teams, only 20 or so Stellar Technology people had survived, leaving behind just a handful of level 3 paranormals. All of their faces were filled with fear. The commander looked at them, feeling very uneasy. "What happened to you?" he asked. They all answered at once, panicking and trying to flee the terrible scene. "We were ambushed. They had an army behind them. They have a level 5 paranormal. He's far too powerful for us to handle. That monster is going to kill all our people." When the commander heard that there had been an ambush, he demanded, "A trap? How could they set up a trap behind us? How did they get there without us seeing them?" The commanders and officers at all levels found what they were being told very hard to believe. But they had to trust the evidence in front of them. The ground was littered with bodies, far more carnage than they had thought just one man could have produced. As they were talking about the scene of devastation in front of them, gunshots rang out in the distance. "Gunfire!" shouted the commander. Looking around at his troops, he could see the fear on all their faces. The officers who were supervising the battle shouted, "Retreat! We need to retreat!" The commander forced himself to remain calm, but we're not sure how many enemy troops there are. He fell into thought. Those machine guns sound a long way away. Why are they not shooting at closer range? Is this just a scare tactic to cover up the fact that they only have a small number of people? But the officers shouted, "We don't care! You have to keep us safe! We need to retreat quickly back to the underground parking lot!" Just as the commander was deciding what to do, his troops encountered a huge setback. An officer reported, "There are level 5 paranormals all over the place. We've never seen so many fighting together before." The commander replied, "No, that's impossible." His head spun with this latest piece of terrible news. This is too much, he thought. How can there possibly be so many level 5 paranormals? The team I sent out there was only equipped to deal with one level 5. How can there be so many? Level 5 snuck both behind us and in advance of our position. How did this mess up happen? Just as the commander let out a roar of frustration, a bright white light pierced his throat and took his life on the spot. Everyone was shocked. But when they saw the man who had killed their commander, they fell silent. It was the lieutenant. "Our most important mission right now should be to retreat and then call for reinforcements," he shouted. "We should wait for reinforcements to arrive where we know we'll be safer." The large battalion of soldiers who had been fighting at the front of the group began to flee as fast as they could. Hearing the order to retreat, they were very relieved. They had previously occupied the underground parking lot, which was only 2 streets away from where they were. Everyone rushed in that direction, hoping the garage would still provide a safe haven. But they made one fundamental error. They didn't cover the rear of their formation, and the members of the Dawn Alliance took advantage of this rare opportunity, rushing out and hunting them down. "Kill these bastards!" an Alliance soldier yelled. The Alliance soldiers ran with their weapons drawn and began a high-speed pursuit. Charles and the rest of his army also began to attack from the flank, firing from their hiding places on both sides of the street. Countless people died in the ensuing battle, mowed down by machine guns. But the retreating Stellar Technology soldiers didn't care about anyone else. They just wanted to save their own skins. That was all that concerned them. So great was their desire to run for cover in the underground parking lot that they forgot all their basic training and battle tactics that could have helped them. They didn't think to cover themselves from the rear, even if their commander had ordered them to fire from the rear ranks. None of them was in a frame of mind to listen, as they scurried away toward the parking lot. 2 of the fleeing men called to each other as they ran. "We've lost our best paranormals. What else can we do but run for cover? Stellar Technology might have mastered advanced biotechnology, and we did have lots of high-level paranormals, but just 2 of them killed most of our level 4s. Yeah, and that one insanely powerful paranormal just finished off the rest. How can we be expected to take on their level 4 paranormals with none of our own? And I bet they have a whole load of level 5s behind those 2. It's too one-sided. Keep running!" The Stellar Technology soldiers were inferior to Charles and the Dawn Alliance fighters in every way. Kevin and Miranda were technically level 4 paranormals, but their special attributes made people think of them as level 5s. Kevin could release True Dragon Soul Energy, and Miranda was deadly in battle. She could kill at such speed that her enemies stood no chance against her. The underground parking lot was only 2 streets away, but despite the short distance, nearly half of the Stellar Technology soldiers had died before they could reach safety. Charles had killed a great many, and the rest had died in a firefight with the Dawn Alliance. The soldiers who were guarding the underground parking garage and the 4 residential areas were all taken by surprise. Why were the people on the front lines running away in such a sorry state? Some of them ran outside to surrender, shock clearly written across their faces. One asked, "How can our front line have been defeated? That's impossible!" Another replied, "Has the Dawn Alliance won? How can that have happened?" Some of the surrendering Stellar Technology troops were totally unable to accept that they had lost the battle. But the lieutenant shouted at them, "Quick! Find a place to hide and tell us which floors you've already cleared. We need to hide and fight back. Stop being so weak!" Hearing the sounds of fighting and gunfire coming from behind, the soldiers didn't dare to delay any longer. They brought the deserters back and hid in some residential buildings that they had cleaned up. Some of them had already confirmed that there were no survivors, and some of them had hidden in the underground parking lot. In less than 20 minutes, the tide of the battle between the Dawn Alliance and Stellar Technology had turned. The Stellar Technology soldiers, who should have been on the attack, were hiding as best they could, using the terrain as cover. Some of them, who had hidden in the residential buildings since they had found some degree of safety there, began to fire their machine guns through the windows. Some of the more hot-blooded Alliance soldiers wanted to charge in, but they were repelled by heavy firepower, leaving some of them dead. Paranormals could withstand gunfire if they were already prepared for it, but some of them had been taken by surprise and had been helpless in the face of the enemy's line of defense. Those who had hidden in the underground garage were also in danger. There was only one way in and out of the garage, so if the Dawn Alliance wanted to attack, they risked going in blind and facing a major attack from which it would be difficult to escape. The battle situation was at a stalemate. Olivia urgently ordered, "Everyone retreat. Don't enter the enemy's line of sight." In such a chaotic situation, it was very difficult to relay orders. But after a few minutes, the Alliance soldiers had found cover and had hidden themselves from view. Filled with excitement from hunting down troops with superior weapons to their own, they were ready for anything. When the fighting stopped, Olivia and Kevin came to stand with Charles and asked, "How should we attack next?" Charles replied, "Don't think about attacking. When I was chasing the enemy, I let some of the weaker ones escape. I didn't have enough soul energy left to deal with all of them. He could use the restoring amulet to continuously gather soul energy, or drink essence water to replenish it. But after he had reached the 4th level, the energy in his body had undergone a qualitative change. The rate of replenishment had also become much slower. This didn't mean that the recovery speed of a level 4 paranormal was slower than a level 3. It was just that the upper limit had increased a lot, causing the recovery speed to appear much slower. Everyone looked concerned. If Charles's soul energy was insufficient, his recovery time would be longer, and the battle would be much more difficult. Zack and the others also came over to them. "I only have less than 10% of my soul energy left," Zack said. "Even with the help of medicinal crystal cores, it'll take at least 2 hours to rebuild my store." Miranda said, "I still have half. I can clear out a few military and civilian buildings." Olivia said, "Then there's no other way. But fortunately, their cars and some of their goods are outside. I think that as long as we guard them, they'll be ours for the taking." Everyone expressed their agreement, including the Alliance's level 4 paranormals. They had consumed a lot of their energy, and their remaining strength could only be used to protect themselves. Charging into enemy lines was more than they could manage. At that moment, a group of Stellar Technology soldiers escorted a group of Dawn Alliance captives out of the underground parking lot. They pointed their guns at the captives' heads and threatened them, shouting, "Let us go, or else all 2,000 captives here will die." Charles was surprised. "How come there are so many captives? Didn't you take a lot of prisoners and send them to their deaths?" A Stellar Technology soldier replied, "There are more who surrendered." Charles wasn't the only member of the Dawn Alliance to be surprised by this revelation. "I can't just let you go," he said. "Don't you care about the lives of these people?" the soldier replied in surprise. Charles said harshly, "They surrendered before they'd gained full membership of the Dawn Alliance, so they're not part of it. I'm not letting you go free for the sake of a bunch of hostages who aren't even my people." The hostages became distraught and shouted in anger when they heard how callous Charles sounded. "You're inhuman! Charles, you bastard! How dare you treat us like this?" Having surrendered to avoid death on the battlefield, it now seemed the hostages would die here instead. The soldier thought for a moment, and then he asked, "Can we negotiate terms with you?" Charles pointed at the hostages who were still cursing him. "Kill them and then you can negotiate with me. Anyway, you still have a lot of captives in there. You don't need these few." The captives cursed even more fiercely, but the soldier decided that what Charles had said made sense. They did have plenty of prisoners. They didn't need this group. In a burst of gunfire, he and his comrades killed all the hostages. In the silence that followed, an officer from Stellar Technology walked over to Charles and said, "I apologize for how things have worked out. I hope we can put our differences behind us now and help each other out." Olivia shouted at him, "How do you have the nerve to say that? You've shot our compatriots to save your own miserable skin, and now you expect to negotiate? You seriously expect us to forgive what you've done and agree to a pact with you? Never. Never in a million years." The Stellar Technology officer looked disdainfully at Olivia and said to Charles, "Is this how you let your subordinates behave? What sort of people are you fighting with here?" Charles replied angrily, "Behavior? You want to talk about behavior? You behave like a bunch of bandits and try to dictate to me how my people should behave? Enough." His black sword appeared in his hand, and in the next moment, he was in the middle of a group of his enemies. Charles's sword flashed in front of him, and all but one of the Stellar Technology soldiers fell to the ground, their loud screams echoing off the walls. Charles deliberately left one officer untouched to become the subject of an experiment he'd been wanting to carry out for some time. "You guys stay here and watch the entrance. I'll be right back," he said to his Dawn Alliance team. He carried the last surviving officer with one hand and took him around a corner out of sight. The officer sneered, "No matter what you ask, I won't tell you anything. Do what you like with me. I won't talk." Charles replied, "Who said I want to ask you something?" Then he knocked the officer unconscious and threw him into the energy storage space, wondering why that particular soldier had been sent out of the underground parking lot to negotiate with him. It's odd that they sent a junior like him, he thought. I'd have expected someone of higher rank than this guy, but he was brave for a junior officer. It takes courage to decide not to give away secrets under pressure.
Charles had kept this officer alive because he wanted to study what would happen to his energy storage space if he kept a living person inside. After he had reached level 4, his energy storage space had rapidly expanded. But he hadn't recovered his strength as quickly as he had expected because he had used so much energy fighting the Crawlers clan. In his previous life, he had reached level 7. But even now, his energy storage space was huge, and he thought it was probably big enough to allow him to carry out his plan. But before I can do that, he thought, I need to be sure it can accommodate people living inside it. After he had thrown the officer into his energy storage space, Charles used a restoring amulet to help him recover his vitality, while carefully watching the effect of the officer's presence on the surrounding space. Charles started thinking about his little experiment. The stellar technology officer is still alive in there. Not quite what I was expecting, but the energy storage space does have life-giving powers, so I guess I shouldn't be too surprised. And it does look like his soul energy is gradually weakening. It must be feeding back to the spiritual world. After observing and pondering for a while, Charles started to understand that, because soul energy was dense in the outside world, it would automatically be weaker inside the energy space. I wonder if there's any way to stop the soul energy weakening in there, Charles thought. In my previous life, I learned about death, and in this life, I understand life. But in the energy storage space, there only seems to be space for life. I wonder if I could open up a space for death in there. He tried to remember the laws of death and destruction that he had learned in his previous life. Looking at the energy storage space, he could see that the wheat he had planted was starting to grow again, and that puzzled him for a moment, until he realized that the digestion of the enemy corpses had caused the wheat to germinate. It had only needed time to grow. Charles began to open up an area for death in the energy storage space, and the wheat seedlings began to sprout so fast that their growth was visible to the naked eye. At the same time, some of the flower pots and plants that he had collected in his experiments began to thrive, but some of the leaves began to turn yellow and wither. Seeing the changes happening to the plants, Charles's understanding of the energy storage space increased. Life and death are opposites, he thought, but at the same time, they complement each other. Everything progresses from life to death, and it can be said that every life starts to die from the moment of birth. But the circle of life is a process. He continued to ponder as he observed the space. In the outside world, the laws of life and death have been completely perfected, but in my energy storage space, life and death are controlled by me. Because of the power of life in there, these plants germinate and grow, but I can control the powers of life and death in my energy storage space by supplying more soul energy. With the large source of soul energy in the energy storage space, the wheat began to mature rapidly. The entire process from tiny seedling to fully grown ears of wheat took less than 10 minutes. Success, said a delighted Charles. His darkest time had been when he had lacked food and water, and the memory was impossible to erase. It had caused his deep obsession with making sure there were always enough supplies. But now, he had discovered that he could plant food in the energy space, so he would never worry about starvation again. He didn't know exactly how much he would be able to grow, but he was certain there would be enough to take care of the people around him. He beamed with excitement as he thought, I wish I could put all the land and water in the world into my energy storage space. Once he calmed down, he felt a peace of mind that he had long been searching for. Food and water guarantee not only survival, but also that my people will behave decently, he thought. Long periods of hunger and thirst make animals of us all, and some people become suicidal. That won't happen ever again. I want to be the best person I can be, and I want my people to live with dignity. As he contemplated his discovery, subtle changes took place in his energy storage space, and it began to symbolize a time of spiritual growth for him. Having realized that life and death were so closely connected, he knew he had found the answer he had long been searching for. Then, his gaze turned to his captive. There was no way that Charles could let his captive live. He could never respect anybody so spineless. And now that he no longer had any use for the man, the time had come to execute him. Just as he was about to make the killing blow, though, he remembered an ability that he had never fully understood in his previous life. The ability to create a lich. He had grown so powerful in all areas, from direct combat to providing support for his allies, that he wasn't too concerned about the difficulty of performing the ritual. He would only need to follow each step, one after another, until it was done. It didn't matter much that he hadn't practiced it, or even that he didn't fully understand it. but there were certain conditions that had to be met before he could achieve this level of cultivation. For a start, it was an expensive business. The materials alone would cost as much as if he were summoning a level 7 hellish creature. Of course, this was a price that he was unable to pay. Although he couldn't afford to create a lich from nothing, he could still transform another person into one. At this point in time, it was a controversial method. Even in hell, it made some wary. If this was even a year later, he thought, far fewer people would have a problem with the idea, but people find it hard to accept things they don't understand. It meant that anyone performing such a ritual couldn't simply do it in public. They had to do it in secret, and Charles had the perfect secret place: the energy storage space. Once he had made up his mind, he prepared to turn his captive into a lich. The fact that he could only manage this simplified version of the method couldn't be helped. Although he was now the figurehead of a large force, he was still poor, without many assets or riches to his name. The most precious thing he owned was his blood-drinking sword, but he had given it to Miranda. It wasn't that he was unable to obtain good things, but that he didn't feel they were worthy of his attention. Rather than waste his time looking for meaningless treasures, it made much more sense to develop his skills and grow his strength. Because of this, though, he could only create the simplified version of a lich. As he began the ritual, black lines of death energy spread from his hands into the captive's body. The officer let out a shrill scream. "What is this place?" he cried out. "Oh no!" Charles acted as though he didn't even hear the man's cries. Instead, he focused on his task and erased the officer's consciousness. After a short while, the screams died down, and then the officer rose to his feet, his eyes completely gray. "Go," said Charles. "Deal with the dead bugs. Divide up their organs." The lich nodded robotically and went to complete the task. The officer's soul had already started to fade, with only his body's natural instinct and most basic brain functioning left behind. The creature was good for nothing now but obeying the simplest of orders. Even so, it was only Charles's extract amulet that had allowed him to give the lich the specific task. Without the amulet, he would only know how to fight. If he had had access to more precious materials, he could have created a lich capable of greater things. But he had done the best with what he had. This simplified version of the creature had another weakness. Because creating the lich had removed the officer's life functions, its ability to digest and absorb energy was no longer comparable to that of living people. In other words, the longer the lich worked, the longer it would need to recover before Charles could put it into action again. An hour of work would take 10 hours of rest. Why am I worrying about these things? Charles asked himself. I was ready to execute the officer, so why not let the lich work until it dies? Because the materials needed to make a genuine lich were so precious, they needed to be treated with great care. If they were damaged or harmed, the greater part of these materials would be lost forever. With the simplified lich, though, there was nothing to worry about, because its energy came from the person who had created it. When the lich was destroyed then, its energy would simply return to its creator's energy storage space. And it didn't matter if the officer's body was damaged in the process. As long as it remained in the energy storage space, it could be recycled again and again. In other words, as long as Charles didn't send this lich to the outside world, he would have a form of free labor, at least for a few days. This reassured him. Sure, he thought. Some people might have a problem with me creating a lich like this, but what do I care? He realized that his principles were those of the future world, which were very different from those of the people in his timeline. Besides, he would be sure to treat the dead bodies well, giving them a proper cremation when he was finished with them. He would make sure not to humiliate his liches, at least not too much. Having said that, though, by joining Stellar Technology, these people had effectively abandoned their families. And for what? To become lapdogs under a slightly more powerful dog, all under the banner of this monstrous corporation. I feel like I'm even more ruthless than Ellis Perry, he thought. Then he corrected himself. Ellis Perry wasn't even alive yet. In any case, these people who had chosen to be nothing but servants in life deserved to become servants of another sort in death. Now that the energy storage space has grown so large, he thought, I'll need as many workers as I can find. Before, when he had still thought of Stellar Technology's people as innocent, he couldn't have dreamed of exploiting them in this way. But now that he understood the depths to which the organization had stooped, it was clear that there wasn't one innocent soul amongst them. It was over an hour before Charles returned from his time with the officer in the energy storage space. Olivia eyed him warily, shifting her gaze between his impassive expression and his blood-stained hands. "Did you get any information? Anything at all?" she asked, thinking he had spent his time interrogating the officer. He shook his head. "His position is too low. I can only get some basic information about stellar technology. I'll need to capture some people higher up the ladder if we're to get anything useful." The upper echelons of stellar technology were easy to recognize by their uniforms, and the officer had been wearing a uniform standard for lower-ranked soldiers. "There are stellar technology people everywhere," said Miranda. "Surely they'll surrender sooner or later. If not, I'll capture a few of them for you." "I have to go and recharge," he said. "I can regain the power I've lost by absorbing the energy of their paranormals. I won't have any problems if the enemy is still hiding in the housing blocks." He needed to be careful with how many of his powers he revealed to the other Alliance members. If he unveiled them all at once, people would become jealous, as if they had learned that someone just like them had won the lottery. When he had first developed the ability to absorb the energy of paranormals, he'd made sure not to announce it straight away. But now the time had felt right. This was part of the reason his influence kept growing and growing. By revealing his abilities piecemeal like this, he would be sure to inspire confidence in his followers, rather than jealousy. Even before he had entered one of the housing blocks, Charles was faced with a barrage of machine gun fire, but he was able to block the bullets with his personal energy shield. A paranormal of his level didn't even need to use the energy storage space for cover. Instead, as with level 4 martial artists, his level 5 abilities meant he could just waltz through a rain of bullets as if it were nothing. The army commander, at the head of a troop of soldiers and some Alliance members, froze as he watched Charles practically ignore the bullets and saunter into the building and out of sight. From inside came the sounds of screaming, gunfire, and roaring flames. He remembered Charles's orders from a few days ago. "All of you, go out and kill the monsters." Charles had called out with passion and excitement. "Don't worry about wasting bullets. In fact, I order you to use up all your ammunition within the next fortnight." At first, the troops had thought that Charles was simply ordering them to fight the monsters with all their might. Now, though, they realized that perhaps the last part in the order was the most revealing. It was becoming clear that as time went on, with the emergence of the paranormals and their various powers, the threat posed by regular weaponry was becoming smaller and smaller. So perhaps this was why they had been ordered to use all their bullets. Before long, they would be useless anyway. The commander was pulled out of these thoughts when some bodies came flying from a window, followed by Charles leaping out of the building and leaving broken glass and flames in its wake as he returned to the fray. "He's winning the fight already?" the commander asked himself, wondering how on earth his army was expected to be of any use on the side of such a powerful individual. Luckily, people of Charles's stature were few and far between, while the enemy was growing day by day, with more and more retired soldiers choosing to enlist once again. He was very confident that before long, the army would return to its former glory. Another minute later, Charles came crashing down from a window higher up, landing on his feet entirely unfazed. A member of the Dawn Alliance muttered, "Why did he even bring us along? So we can watch him show off?" Many in the Alliance had originally joined in the hope that they might learn new powers, and some of the already awakened paranormals among them saw the Alliance as a means to increase their abilities even further. Although they hadn't for a second dared to think of challenging Charles's authority, they had been sure that, by being in his presence, their own importance could only grow. But faced with his amazing feats of strength, it was finally hitting home that he didn't really need them there at all. Without Charles, they were nothing. But without them, he would still be as powerful as ever. Of course, if he knew what they were thinking, he would tell them they were, in fact, indispensable to him. After all, they were an excellent source of crystal cores. Charles fought on, taking down the enemies inside the housing block and storing them in the energy storage space. The space had many bodies in it, from this and previous battles. This is why he had started so many fires. When the battle was over, he would be able to tell his people that he had simply burnt the bodies so they wouldn't be left wondering where all the fallen enemies had gone. After 15 minutes, a group ran out of the building with their hands raised in surrender. "Throw all your weapons to the ground," ordered Olivia. "Hold your heads in your hands and stay down. Anyone who disobeys will be shot." "Is this how you treat surrendered soldiers?" one of them asked. "This goes completely against all notions of human rights." After the soldier didn't get to the end of his sentence before Miranda, at Olivia's side, sucked all his blood from him with the blood-drinking sword. She sheathed it while his dried-up body flopped to the ground. The remaining soldiers were stunned, not only at how sickeningly she had dispatched the man, but also how calmly. They threw their weapons far from them and cowered on the ground. "Spare me! You win! We surrender!" They wept into the dirt, wondering why they had been treated so cruelly after surrendering. They thought that the Alliance must be full of lunatics who simply wanted to make people suffer and cast all their human rights aside. Charles came out of the building and joined Olivia and Miranda. The leaders of the Dawn Alliance would never stoop to discuss human rights with people who allowed their bosses to treat them like dogs. "Gather all their equipment and start the interrogation," Charles said to Olivia, walking among the crowd of cowering Stellar Technology soldiers. "Make sure you learn each one of their crimes and the crimes of their employer." "Isn't it better to let the military take charge here?" she asked. But until Charles had more trust in the military, he wanted to keep this an Alliance matter. "If we get the military to carry out the interrogations, we'll miss out on an opportunity to show the rest of the Alliance just how despicable Stellar Technology is. I don't want the Army to hide these monsters away in a quiet room somewhere. I want the Alliance to hear the confessions of these pigs with their own ears." Olivia nodded. "Of course." "Just do as I say," he ordered. "And when they've told you everything they know, well, then we'll know everything." He had stopped in front of the body of an unconscious Stellar Technology employee, whose uniform distinguished him as of high rank. He crouched down to inspect him. "Leave this one to me," he said. This time, he really did want to interrogate the man. This was what they had wanted all along, after all. A high-ranking member of the organization who was bound to have all sorts of inside information. Charles hoisted the man over his shoulder and took him inside the abandoned housing block. He cast a charm on the place so that they wouldn't be disturbed. By this point, the man was beginning to wake up. Charles asked him, "Do you have a base nearby?" He was making use of a control amulet, which had the power to make his opponent lose his mind, divulge important information, and perform actions against his will. Its only flaw was that it couldn't force somebody to act completely against their moral code. For example, it couldn't be used to force a son to kill his father if the son loved his father. "Yes," murmured the officer, dazed. "A few days ago, we discovered a mine nearby and established a base there. There was something special about it. At one point, you guys almost found us. When we knew you were close, we sent some soldiers to kidnap some of your people for test subjects." So they built their base in a mine, thought Charles. He finally understood why the Neal family hadn't found any enemies when they had been cleaning up the place. Stellar Technology had set up one of its most important bases in this area after all, and the reason they hadn't built it near the spring was that they found an even more important resource nearby. "But wait," said Charles. "You said there was something special about the mine?" He became lost in thought. After the world had changed, the Earth itself had started to act in unusual ways. Many humans had awakened their superpowers, while others had become zombies. A great many animals and plants had also mutated beyond recognition. Even the soil and the rocks had changed. As the new soul energy began to fill the world, special springs with unusual properties had also materialized, while mineral veins below the Earth had started to produce all kinds of new metals and crystals. A mine that could allow Stellar Technology to build one of its 3 most important strongholds in the area was no ordinary mine. Charles had often wondered how they had been able to produce so many cyborg beasts at almost zero cost. It had almost seemed as if their materials were endless and underneath their feet all this time. Finally, he could guess what sort of mine this really was. "They're mining blue flame energy gems," he thought. "If I'm right, and if Stellar Technology has been using it all this time, then cutting off their supply will really turn the tide of battle. What's more, I can then use the gems for the Alliance." Looking at things this way, the fight against Stellar Technology didn't look so impossible after all. The ancient texts talked of the different uses blue flame energy gems could be put to. They weren't as special as some other resources, but were very supple and could be combined with living matter in a way that other stones and metals couldn't. One of the limits to Earth's technology was that so few of its natural resources were able to be combined with human flesh. This was the reason that although an advancement like the mechanical arm had been invented decades ago, it hadn't been successful until now. Blue flame energy gems could both merge with a human body and repair its injuries. They gave the body the strength of steel, while also remaining very flexible. They didn't hamper the performance of the rest of the body either. When combined with medicinal crystal cores, the gems could make one incredibly strong. It was so obvious to Charles now. It must have been the discovery of this mine that had allowed Stellar Technology to create such an endless stream of powerful cyborg beasts. It had allowed the organization to create an army entirely under its will, without any human failings, weaknesses, or disloyalties. If Charles could somehow cut off its supply to this incredible raw material, it would set the Stellar Technology war machine back by at least a few months. These few months would be Charles's opportunity. He was determined to seize the source of the gems. After asking the officer some more questions, the answers to which confirmed some details he had guessed based on what he knew of the world in the future, he transported the man into the energy storage space and turned him into another simplified lich. He had decided that anyone who ended up in the storage space would be imprisoned there for life. The space was getting bigger and bigger, and as time went on, he would need a great deal of labor to develop it. The best way in his mind was to work his captives until they died. After the interrogation, he returned to the group. The air was tense, and it was clear that the crowd was up in arms about something. Stellar Technology has gone too far, Olivia said, her voice shaking with anger. They've captured people for their evil experiments, and even transformed some of them into cyborg beasts. Everyone is furious. They want to take on Stellar Technology immediately, no matter the consequences. Charles's plan with the interrogations had worked. The people had finally realized just how evil Stellar Technology was. Compared to this organization, with its various machinations and inhuman experiments, the zombies and bugs they had fought were practically harmless. Now that they had heard the interrogation of the Stellar Technology soldiers, many in the Dawn Alliance refused to rest until the organization was destroyed completely. I agree with you, said Charles. Stellar Technology is trampling over the integrity of human nature itself. As long as they are allowed to work their evil ways, we'll never know peace. Miranda nodded. Right now, if we can be sure of anything, it's that nobody in that organization is innocent. The crowd understood this last sentiment most of all. It wasn't just that Stellar Technology was willing to execute anyone who stood against it, but those who were captured had all become the test subjects in the organization's laboratories. Their actions are inhuman, said Greg, while a commander stood next to him, nodding enthusiastically. I speak for the entire military when I say that we could never let such an enemy go unpunished. No matter what it takes, we promise to bring them down. We should deal with the people in the underground parking lot for starters, said Charles. Once they've been taken care of, the Dawn Alliance will officially declare war on Stellar Technology. We'll fight to the death. There are too few entrances to the underground parking lot, said Olivia. Although our Earth-powered paranormals will be able to shift the Earth to help us gain access, the enemy also has Earth-powered paranormals strengthening the ground against us. It'll be a close battle, especially as their paranormals outnumber our own. The members of the Dawn Alliance were clearly restless to start the fight, and several called out, Let's rush them right now! Even with our lives on the line, we'll help the Alliance leader find a way into that garage. Right! Shouted another. If it means killing these pigs, I don't care what happens to me! We can't let them get away with this, bellowed yet another. Let's kill them all. Leave it to us to open a route inside, said the company commander. After we made an opening, you guys can follow behind. Silence, bellowed Charles. Everyone fell quiet. He took a moment to look over them and make sure they really were listening before he continued. Stellar Technology has many troops on its side, not to mention cyborg beasts. Everyone here still has a long life ahead of them. This isn't the time to run into this rashly and get killed in the process. So we need to make sure we're prepared. Do you really think you can take down their entire army just because you have fire in your hearts? And have you thought about the captives inside? I'll spare nobody who's turned over to the enemy's side. I'll only take people with me who are prepared to make difficult decisions. If you feel like you can, take a step forward. If not, stand back. He finished speaking and waited for each member of the crowd to make their decision. Could they really face killing captives who had once been on their side? This was more than a matter of simply following orders. If even Olivia had issued an order like this in the past, many would have been hesitant to comply. It was hard to tell what path they might take if they found themselves facing such a weighty decision. A man stepped forward. Not so long ago, he said in a ragged voice, we were unwilling to shoot at the captives that the enemy was using as shields, and look what happened then. We almost let those swines waltz right through our front door. We should have shot them when we had the chance. Another man stood out. That's right, he said. Nowadays, we can't afford to be soft-hearted. Taking pity on anyone just because they used to be one of us, that's the same as shooting down one of our allies point blank. Now get out of my way. And with this, he joined Charles's side. Those cowards made their decision when they surrendered to Stellar Technology in the first place, said a woman. They joined the enemy, so now they are the enemy. I don't see any reason to spare a single one of them. One member after another stepped out of the crowd to join Charles. No one was willing to stay behind. They had learned where pity and mercy got them in the last battle, and now that they were faced with a similar risk, they wouldn't make the same mistake again. Very good, said Charles. Now that we all understand the situation, nothing can stop us. The next step is very simple. I'll force those rats out of their nest, and then you can take care of them when they come running out. Only Olivia dared to speak against him. This is too risky, she said. Not if we're prepared, said Charles, shaking his head. And we're very prepared. Olivia looked at him questioningly as he smiled and used his storage amulet to haul several large barrels of gasoline from the energy storage space. These were the barrels he had taken from the gas station, 100 in all. He'd used some of the gasoline already when he had taken on Stellar Technology earlier, but most of it was still unused in the storage space. He knew gasoline would be very useful and would last a long while, so he'd stored as much as he could. The time to put it to use had arrived. He would need to save his soul energy for later, so for now, 100 barrels of gasoline would do the same job. And especially now that most of their vehicles had been damaged and the production of cars had come to an end, it was hardly as if they needed to save the barrels for fuel. With the help of the Alliance members, he loaded the barrels into one of the remaining trucks, which he drove to the entrance of the parking lot, the Alliance in tow. Once the truck was in position, he lit a fire, and everyone ducked for cover. Soon, the flames burst out in a violent explosion, blasting a hole in the earth and uncovering the underground lot. Through the crash of stone and the roar of fire, voices could be heard screaming from within. You've gone too far this time! I can't believe they'd actually do this! They're despicable! The explosion had caused many casualties, but many paranormals in the lot had survived. They cursed and cried, furious at what the Dawn Alliance had done. Others saw how desperate their situation had become, and they cried out in surrender. But, true to his word, Charles wouldn't give them the chance to submit. He and Zack conjured a joint hellfire spell, setting ablaze the gasoline that hadn't yet ignited, claiming many more lives. The members of the Dawn Alliance didn't wait to join the fray. Seeing how many of these traitors and cowards had already been killed, they rushed in to finish the job without even waiting for their orders. Not giving any thought for their own safety, they charged down into the parking lot while Charles watched them. He understood that they needed to do this. If he didn't allow them this chance to vent their fury, it would eat them alive. At long last, dawn broke. The battle had gone on all through the night, but finally, this group of Stellar Technologies forces had been defeated. And not just the soldiers had fallen. The Alliance had also dispatched all of their members who had surrendered to the organization. Many had pleaded for mercy, but none had been granted it. The Alliance was firm in the belief that these traitors couldn't be bargained with. After their great betrayal, they couldn't believe that these people would beg for understanding and forgiveness. Although Charles had considered capturing some of these people to work in the energy storage space, he realized the benefit to killing them instead. With the battle now over, the Dawn Alliance began to count its losses. It had started the battle with more than 12,000 members. 3,000 of these had been non-combatants, mostly family members of the soldiers. The Alliance had lost so many soldiers in the fight, both men and women, that only 6,000 remained. This was a huge loss, even greater than it had sustained in the fight against the bugs. Some members had hidden from the enemy to escape capture, which Charles and the other founding members of the Alliance were willing to forgive. After all, not everybody could be expected to risk their lives to fight the enemy, and it was enough that they had decided to hide rather than surrender. Olivia addressed the survivors. As we all know, we're living in a time of disaster. Not only must we face the dangers of zombies and bugs, we also have to face the evil inside our fellow human beings. Even if we decided to live a peaceful life and hide in some far-off corner of the world, danger would find us in the end. The battle-weary crowd listened on glumly. But even in this era of devastation, we've shown that we're capable of pulling together and fighting side by side against the enemy," she continued, and some members of the crowd began to perk up, nodding along to her words. "We've survived another battle. If you want to keep on surviving, then we need to work together, first to build a home, and then to defend it with all the weapons and skills at our disposal." The eyes of the crowd lit up with hope. Before this battle, most of them had seen the Dawn Alliance as a means of protection, but they had been unwilling to follow its orders. After living through this battle, though, any doubts they had had about their loyalty had gone out of the window. If it hadn't been for the Dawn Alliance, they wouldn't be standing there that morning. Before they could hope to fight for power, they first needed to fight for survival, and it was clear now that the Alliance was the only thing that could guarantee that survival. As ever, though, there were still some naysayers in the crowd. Somebody shouted, "How are we to know you won't just use us as cannon fodder or servants to do your bidding?" "That's right," called another. "Why not put your money where your mouth is and give us some better weapons? Then we'll definitely help you fight." Soon others started clamoring. "If you want us to help, you have to promise in front of everyone that you won't use us as cannon fodder, bait, or sacrifices. And give us enough food and water to keep us going." "Yeah, you've got to start making some promises, or else we'll never follow you." A small number of this dissenting group was made up of paranormals, while the others were their friends and family. After the losses the Alliance had sustained, these people had convinced themselves that the Alliance needed them as much as they needed it, so it was the perfect time to lay out their demands. After all, they knew that their powers made them valuable, and surely this qualified them to make certain requests. They were surprised then to be met with cold, glaring looks from the original members of the Alliance. Sensing the uneasy atmosphere, they quieted down. They weren't used to being contested. Usually when members of the crowd started to call out, everybody joined in. Why was nobody backing them up now? Did these people really not want to demand better conditions when the scales were in their favor? "If you aren't satisfied with the Dawn Alliance," said Olivia, her calm voice cutting through the tension, "then you can leave now." A young man, one of the dissenters, said, "What did you just say?" "The Dawn Alliance never asked anybody to join," said Olivia. "All we're doing is trying to survive. If you aren't satisfied with our rules, you can leave. We won't stop you." The young man scowled at her. "But if you want us to stick around, shouldn't you give us a good reason?" "That's where you're wrong," she said. "We don't want you to stick around. If you want to help us, then help us. And if you're helping us, you need to follow the rules. Otherwise, you can go. You aren't giving us anything of use, and we'll be glad to see you leave." "We can't trust these people," the man said, turning to the crowd. "Can't you see it? They're going to use us as cannon fodder. You can't listen to a word they say." He looked around him from one face to the next, waiting for somebody to take his side.